Welcome to the Literature Lounge, where writers and authors share their stories behind their stories. Hi, in today's episode, we have with us Radhika Oberoi, an accomplished author and journalist known for her evocative writing that often explores complex social and political themes. Her debut novel, Stillborn Season 2018, is a gripping narrative set against the backdrop of the 1984 anti Sikh riots in India, weaving together multiple interlinked stories that capture the turmoil and human impact of that period. In addition to her novel, Oberoi has made significant contributions to literature and journalism. Her essays and book reviews have been featured in prominent publications such as the New York Times, India Inc., Forbes India, Nikkei Asia, The Wire, Business Standard, Indian Express, Outlook Magazine, and Mekong Review. Her short stories have been published in the Indian quarterly IQ magazine, Words and Women, an anthology of women's writings published in UK in 2014, and Otherwise magazine. Radhika holds an MA in creative writing, prose fiction from the University of East Anglia in the United Kingdom, which has further honed her narrative skills and contributed to her success as a writer. And for me, this is a personal, absolute pride and honor to have you here with me, because I was in Delhi during the 1984 Sikh riots and it has really, really left me so scarred, Radhika. So, welcome to today's episode.
Thank you, Mohua, and thank you for that introduction. It's really lovely to be on your show. And yes, I do hope we can have this really intense discussion about my work.
So, of Mothers and Other Perishables is such a unique title. Can you tell us a little bit more from the inspiration for this book? Where did it come from?
So, the inspiration is a very deeply personal one. I lost my mother when I was 15 years old. I lost her to cancer. And that nugget of personal history has crept into the book. Although, of course, when you write fiction, characters change and your life changes and alters a lot on the page. So, Of Mothers and Other Perishables really is an exploration of grief and bereavement and lamentation to that extent. And I was also trying to create a new vocabulary of grief. I was trying to experiment with language. I was trying to, structure the novel in an interesting manner. And so all of that transformed my grief into a story that became universal. Having said that, I also wanted to write a novel that was very contemporary, set in Delhi, set amidst the contemporary politics of Delhi. Its politics, its activism, its beautiful homes, its universities. And which is why it's sort of structured in alternating chapters, which is something I'll discuss at another stage. But yes, so I wanted to create a novel that was both intimate as well as political.
Amazing, Radhika. To put together your grief and put that together is a very, very intense and an internal, process. So, what was the most challenging part of writing Of Mothers and Other Perishables? It's such an interesting title. It really touches me very deeply, Radhika. So, tell me, what did you find the most tough when you were putting together, your writing work?
So a little bit about the title. The title is inspired by Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Of Love and Other Demons. It's a favorite novel of mine. It's a hauntingly beautiful novel. And the most challenging part, to answer your question, is really about, the narrative structure. I was experimenting with alternating chapters. So there are two very compelling voices in the novel: the mother, the dead mother, and the daughter. And I wanted the dead mother's voice to be this intimate, personal, slightly eccentric voice, if you want to call her that. And I wanted the daughter's voice to be very urgent and compelling and very grounded in what is going on in Delhi currently. So to compare and contrast the two and to have a narrative that bleeds into one another, to have the past infringe upon the present and the present influenced by the past, all of that was challenging at some points.
The book has a very hauntingly beautiful narrative voice. How did you approach writing from the perspective of someone who's passed away?
So thank you for that. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the mother's narrative. Now, the dead mother's voice, it's infused with nostalgia, and her storeroom and the objects in it, saris wrapped in muslin, albums of black and white photographs, collection of vinyl records, old leather suitcases, cupboards full of baby clothes, each trigger a memory which recreate her youth in the 1970s. So each object in the storeroom is almost like a time capsule that triggers a memory and takes you back to an era when she was young and beautiful. So I also wanted to create a universe that is tragic comic and not just comic, I mean, and not just tragic. I wanted the mother to notice things in the contemporary world. So she notices the new refrigerator in the house and she's very enamored of it. She also notices the fact that her photographs have been uploaded on Instagram. So she's not really a ghost-like, a melancholic ghost-like, fixture in the house. She's more like, a dead voice, a dead narrative technique that observes what's going on even now and has a humorous take on it. And I was also, keen to explore memory and the disjointedness of memory. So memory plays tricks on us all the time. And it's also never chronological. Whenever we remember things, we remember them in fragmentary ways. And Salman Rushdie has this really interesting essay called Imaginary Moments, in which he talks about the disjointedness of memory and the fact that when we recollect something, we never recollect it fully. We recollect it impartially. And that impartial recollection lends itself to very interesting narratives. So I was experimenting with what memory can do and how memory plays out within a narrative.
Wonderful, Radhika. The storeroom in the book feels like a character. It's a complete character in itself. So, what significance does this space hold, in your writing?
Yeah, so the storeroom is really much more than a physical space. It really is the central conceit, the central metaphor of the novel. And it's a very compact, almost a claustrophobic geography, but it's also a very elastic geography in so many ways because, it takes you back to the past or it can recreate the present depending on the mood of the dead narrator or her daughter who visits the storeroom frequently to unfold and refold the saris and to recollect her mother and to sort of look at the old photographs, the black and white photographs. So the dead mother, she inhabits this space and it's home to her and all her worldly belongings and her saris, her photographs, her vinyl records. Each of these contains a personal memory. But the dead woman's daughters, the Whaler and Toon, they also have their own equation with the storeroom. So for the Whaler, the storeroom becomes a repository of childhood memories. She kind of goes there and she recollects happy moments that she had with her mother. But for Toon, it is a very claustrophobic space. It's a space that represents, an old world, something that she finds strange and outdated, a space that is claustrophobic, a space that she is not drawn to in the least bit and wants to stay away from. So it's both. It's a repository of grief, it's a repository of memories, and it's also a very claustrophobic space, depending on which character decides to visit the story.
The imagery you use, like the Banarsi saris, being treated like corpses, is striking. Can you talk about the use of such vivid imagery, in your writing?
Thanks. I'm glad that you found the imagery vivid. I wanted to talk about the saris specifically because the saris, were very close to the dead mother, and she was once young and beautiful and healthy, and the saris represent that period in her life when she was young and beautiful and healthy. And they're wrapped in malmal now. They're almost like corpses because no one uses them. So perhaps they miss the contours of her body. Perhaps they miss going out for dinner with her husband. There are other images, of course. There's the vinyl records and the turntable, which also take you back to a very happy time in her life when she was, young, and when there was romance in her life and possibilities in her life. I also wanted to mention the fact that the French novelist Marcel Proust, who wrote In Search of Lost Time — I haven't read In Search of Lost Time because it's in 7 volumes, but he talks about a small sponge cake called mandolines. When dipped in tea, they recreate a lost time. They sort of help him remember the essence of a moment, which is a really pleasurable moment. So it brings out a certain pleasurable nostalgia and a deep longing for that moment. So the objects in the storeroom, the ones that are strewn all over the storeroom, are meant to recreate that nostalgia and recreate perhaps that pleasurable moment that Proust talks about in his novel.
The protagonist reflects on her illness with a mix of detachment and intimacy. So, how did you navigate writing these really difficult personal moments?
So the protagonist, she talks about her illness and she talks about it from the distance of — she's dead now. So, she also says in one chapter that the disease's malevolent grip is no longer on her and she can, look upon it even with humor and write about it or talk about it as though it never really happened to her. So once she mentions the fact that, when she read, it sounded as though a porcupine was stuck in her throat. So the distance of death allows her to be humorous about her disease. For me to recreate my mother's disease was, of course, both painful and cathartic. But I'm also writing about it, after 30, 35 years of her being dead. So for me, there is that time creates distance, and also there's a certain emotional distance when you write fiction. So when you're writing fiction, the words and the story transforms on the page, and what happens really is that my story then becomes somebody else's story as well. A lot of young people have been through bereavement and have lost parents when they are young. So I'm hoping that a lot of young people will read this, or anyone at any age will read this and relate to the words on the text and feel as though my experience is really their experience.
Wonderful, Radhika. So, the relationship between the protagonist and her daughter is central to the story. How did you approach writing the mother daughter dynamic? That can be so layered. There can be so many things. I mean, I'm a single child and a daughter to my mother, and, my mother's a widow now. And there are so many layers. And, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're happy. So, tell me, how did you approach this whole thing?
So the mother-daughter dynamic, it is a very layered dynamic. Several novelists have attempted it in their own way. Several short story writers, Alice Munro wrote a story called Friend of My Youth, which is about the mother-daughter dynamic. In this case, it becomes even more complex because the mother is already dead. So the mother-daughter dynamic is layered by death and the fact that she's no longer there, but her presence is felt by both the daughters. I wanted to point out that there's also a daughter-daughter dynamic that's playing out in this novel between the Wailer and the Tomb, between the two sisters. And between them is this really massive, turgid silence that they must navigate. And that really changes the narrative or imbues it with a lot of tension. And I wanted to capture familial tension through, perhaps meal times or food and how they navigate the dining table, how they avoid meeting each other over the dining table and talking to each other in the house. And that really creates a very stress-inducing atmosphere in the house. So the story could very well be about the two sisters, about the Wailer and Tomb, with the mother watching over them. It is, of course, about the relationship that each has with the dead mother, but it is also about the Wailer and Tomb and how they play out their lives.
Amazing, Radhika. The idea of objects holding memories is a powerful one. Do you have any personal items that carry very significant memories for you?
Yeah, there's one personal item. In fact, it's there in the novel as well. It's this little trophy that I won at a sporting event, at a running event when I was in pre-nursery. And, the teacher blew the whistle and I was the only child who ran because the other kids were afraid of the sound of the whistle. And I ran straight to my mother who was sitting on the other end of the compound. And I still remember that because it's firstly the only little trophy I won for a sporting event. I've been terrible at sports all my life. And it was also, it's this really beautiful, evocative, tiny little trophy which is still there in the storeroom. And it finds a mention in the novel. So that really is something that is very dear to me.
There's a strong sense of nostalgia in the book. How do you see the role of nostalgia in storytelling?
So nostalgia is perhaps how we reclaim lost time and a personal history. Literary critic Dennis Walder, he mentions the fact that nostalgia is memory's stepchild. So nostalgia can really evoke a lost era, a lost time, a really beautiful moment that you spend with someone. And an example that springs to mind immediately is Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, which is this really patchy, disjointed, but really exuberant recreation of the city of Bombay. He moves away, he immigrates, but Bombay comes back in his novels constantly because that's really where he spent his childhood. And he recreates that through the lens of nostalgia in so many of his novels.
You had the opportunity to study creative writing at the University of East Anglia. How did this academic experience shape your approach to writing, especially for many authors and many of our listeners, if they want to go ahead and do the same thing, which I have been meaning to also do. So please share with us what was the whole experience like, Radhika.
So the creative writing course, firstly, the one at the University of East Anglia, it's really a brilliant course to participate in. They have these workshops, and you need to submit a piece of work which is reviewed by a group of 8 or 9 people in the class, and that process can be daunting initially. For someone who's not exposed to it, and for someone who's, and also writing is a very personal experience. It's a personal experience that you put on the page and then you're exposing it to the world. So that can be daunting. It can be very intimidating. And of course, as students, we're all slightly very sure of ourselves and not very sensitive to another person's feelings. So that if you're a very sensitive person, it can hurt. But the creative writing course, because of that, it makes you resilient through the process of writing and the process of rewriting and editing your own work. It makes you aware of your own work. It makes you self-conscious as a writer, which is a good thing. And it also makes you very aware of the craft of writing, which is really about voice and points of view and structure and narrative techniques. And that, I think, adds a lot. It makes your manuscript, when you submit it, it adds a lot of depth, and it what you submit is really a very well-crafted manuscript rather than something that is just off your head and something that's just a stream of consciousness, unstructured narrative. You do think about what you're writing and then submit your work accordingly.
So, Radhika, tell me a little bit about nostalgia. What does nostalgia play as a role in your life?
Nostalgia is, it's called memory's stepchild, and it is also a very, very rich lens through which you can view your childhood. And several authors have played around with nostalgia, and the example that immediately springs to mind is Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, which is really this beautiful, patchy, digressional, and extremely inaccurate recreation of the city of Bombay, which is where he grew up. And about nostalgia, you may travel the world and you may settle down in the first world in New York and London. But a lot of authors then go back to that little city or the little village that they have left behind. And they use the lens of nostalgia to create very beautiful, magic realist geographies, terrains, geographies of the mind, we call them. Rushdie calls them geographies of the mind. And those cities or those villages are never what they really are, because you can never reclaim what you have left behind fully. But through memory and through nostalgia, you can recreate them in a far more vivid, if somewhat inaccurate, manner.
So, Radhika, let's talk a little bit about your childhood. What is it that, to you personally, you go back to? Like for me, I always remember the clear streams in Shillong, the roads, the rain. And there is something about the rain of Shillong that I've not been able to actually find that anywhere else, in the world. But every time there is like rain, I remember, but then I try and look out from my own window and I can't see those, the greenery, the butterflies, the dew, kissed mornings. So I'm sure there are some parts of you that go back to, a part of your childhood that you hold very dearly in your heart. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So yes, childhood, my novel is really an exploration of my childhood to some extent. And there are many, many memories that are very close to my heart. I remember how my mother used to, when she was alive, she used to read to me, and she used to read fairy tales to me. And, she also read The Wind in the Willows, which is this really beautiful anthropomorphic novel. Really, it's meant for adults as well. And she was extremely worried that I would never outgrow reading fairy tales and tales about teddy bears and flying creatures. She wanted me to read more mature literature, which I did at a later stage in my life, but she was not alive to witness that. So that is a very dear memory, the fact that she would read to me every night. And then my parents would also drive me to school. So I went to this convent in Chanakyapuri, and my parents would drive me in their standard herald, and they would both get up in the morning to get me ready and, tie my shoelaces and make sure my uniform was ironed. Those little memories have crept into the novel as well. When LP, which is, the Wailer and Toon's dad, he gets up in the morning. He's now bereaved. His wife is no longer around. So he needs to get the girls ready for school in time, and he does it all by himself. There's no one else around to help him. So childhood really tinges your narrative with all kinds of tints and textures that turn it into something else, but they creep into the narrative and turn it into something quite magical.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for being on today's episode, and we wish you lots and lots of luck and more books from you. And thank you so much for being on the Book Show.
Thank you, Mama. It was wonderful.